All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this presentation. My name is Sarah. I work with the San Diego Food System Alliance, and we're today partnered with the City of Oceanside to talk to you all about how we can all waste less and enjoy more, and share tips, tricks, and strategies for how we can reduce food waste at home. So we're really happy to have you all joining us today so that we can learn something together. So just to get us started with the presentation, a few housekeeping items for this webinar. All participants will be muted throughout the duration of the presentation. We will have a dedicated question and answer session at the end of the hour. So if you do have a question that comes up while we're presenting, please feel free to use the Q&A feature. That's going to be a button at the bottom of your screen or the bottom of the navigation through Zoom, and we'll get to your questions through there. And then we also want to remind everyone to keep an eye on the chat box throughout the presentation as we talk through some different tips and resources. We have some links and information that we'll want to share with you. So keep your eye on that, and the links will be sent directly for you to open and then follow along with us through the presentation. If you did pre-register for this workshop and we have your email address, we'll also be providing all the resources through email to those who are pre-registered, but these resources will also live online through the greenoceanside.org website. We were really fortunate to be able to also distribute these educational resources through physical packets with some of our community food recovery organizations, and they were able to share this information and resources directly with their clients. So we're excited to share it with you all today, and also to have been able to share it with the community. And before we get started, just to give a brief overview of what we will be covering and talking about today, we'll start off just by introducing ourselves and our organizations. We'll talk a little bit about the issues of hunger and food waste and share some facts and statistics. And then really do a deep dive into tips, tricks, and strategies for how we can reduce our food waste at home. And we'll be doing that through the 4 categories that you see listed here, which is meal planning, smart grocery shopping, proper food storage, and zero waste cooking. So to start off, I wanted to share a little bit about the San Diego Food System Alliance. We are a powerful network of over 150 multi-sector organizations and are committed to really cultivating a healthy, sustainable, and just food system in our region. So together, we support our local farmers and fishermen. We ensure that low-income communities have access to healthy, quality food, and we ensure that nothing gets wasted in this system of food here in our region. So you can see here on the slide some information about our network, but really the way that we do this complex work is by promoting collaboration across sectors, influencing public policy, and then influencing consumers and institutions to really catalyze long-lasting changes on a spectrum of food system issues. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Colleen Foster from the City of Oceanside to share a little bit more about the city and their Green Oceanside initiative.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm really glad to be here today, and I want to thank the San Diego Food System Alliance for partnering with the City of Oceanside and hosting these webinars and resources for our community and the greater community at large in the virtual world. Again, my name is Colleen Foster. I'm the City of Oceanside's Environmental Officer. I've been with the city for just under the past 15 years. I oversee the city's zero waste program, as well as work closely with our solid waste and recycling services franchise hauler. I also work very closely and alongside our city's Green Oceanside team to promote and support sustainability within our community and a healthy community for a healthy economy and environment. So the City of Oceanside was an early adopter to zero waste in 2011. We developed a zero waste plan that focused on diverting resources from the landfill and really utilizing resources for their highest and best use. And when you look at a waste stream, a significant portion of that is organics, and the majority of that is food scraps. And I know, Sarah, you're going to talk about that a little bit later. Early on, we decided that not only do we need to develop systems for recycling and diversion, but really we need to make sure that food is going to people first, right? And so that really fostered this whole interest and support by the city to develop infrastructure and programming such as the Green Oceanside Kitchen and programming such as this webinar today. So in 2015, the city started its Green Oceanside Kitchen project with the final completion of the kitchen in 2019. As part of that project, we developed a large-scale commercial kitchen dedicated to sustainability and food recovery, again, feeding people, not landfills. And that kitchen is operated in partnership with the Oceanside Kitchen Collaborative. As part of the kitchen infrastructure project, we also developed a small community-based culinary arts training kitchen that we want to host programming and workshops out of. Well, today we're in a COVID world, so we're doing a lot of our workshops virtually, but just because we're in COVID, there's still so much opportunity to share with one another. And we're really excited to work with the greater community to help them understand how zero waste can not only be good for the environment, but ultimately good for our budget and our wallets. And so I'm excited to hear about all the tips and tricks you have, Sarah, for our residents and our community members. And I think it's important to recognize that the current world, the current conditions have impacted everyone. And truly sustainability and sustainable practices such as zero waste in the kitchen really can help anyone of all income levels and all needs. I know I've had different experiences through my life. I faced food insecurity. I've also, been very fortunate at times and well off, and I've had lots of resources. And throughout all of that, I've learned a lot about how, food is too good to waste. And I've also had to learn quite a bit about, what to do with it. And I'm still learning. And so I think this workshop is a great opportunity to share that. So again, welcome from my home. I get to have a fancy Zoom kitchen in the background. So that's kind of fun to have my dream kitchen. And I'm really glad to be here today. So welcome to everyone that's joining us today. So thank you from the Green Oceanside team.
Great, thank you so much, Colleen. And again, like Colleen mentioned, we're so excited to have all of you here. And we actually wanted to hear from all of our participants how you got to hear about this workshop opportunity. So there should be a quick poll question that pops up on your screen. If you could just let us know how you learned about this workshop, we would really appreciate that feedback. Great, let's give 10 more seconds here and then we'll close this out. Great, well, thank you so much for providing that feedback. It always helps us with our upcoming programming. So to start off with, with our presentation, we wanted to start off with a conversation about hunger, particularly because September actually is Hunger Action Month, which is a month-long nationwide awareness and action campaign around the issue of hunger, bringing together individuals, nonprofit organizations, as well as government stakeholders, discussing and taking action on how to make a difference on this issue. And hunger is a prevalent issue in our community. Prior to COVID-19 here in San Diego County, 1 in 7 San Diegans were considered food insecure. And when we kind of think about the issue of food waste, which we'll be talking about in a lot more detail throughout the rest of this presentation, also in San Diego County, we have close to 500,000 tons of food making their way to landfill or ending up in the trash every year, while at the same time, close to 500,000 people don't know where their next meal is coming from. Specific to the city of Oceanside, there are about 1 in 5 Oceanside residents that are considered food insecure. And actually in some areas, that statistic goes to 1 in 2 children who don't know where their next meal is coming from. And when we overlay the issue of COVID-19 with the issue of hunger, we've just seen nationwide that the need has just grown exponentially. And perhaps there are families or individuals that have never needed food assistance or have never wondered about where they might get their food, are now struggling with that a little bit and are seeking help. And so what we wanted to do as we start off this presentation are really introduce and talk about some resources that are available for anyone that may need food assistance. There are government programs like CalFresh or WIC. There are school meal programs. I know schools, have gone through some interesting schedules, but there are schools that continue to distribute food to their students. There are community-based organizations, food pantries that are hosting community distributions, and then home-delivered meal services for seniors or people that have disabilities that might not be able to go and pick their own food. All of these resources are available in the community for anyone that needs them, and we want to encourage anyone participating today or anyone that you may know that could benefit from these resources to really look into them and see how you can get connected to these resources. So the links that you see here on the screen right now, we're actually going to send through the chat. Highly encourage you all to look through them and see what resources are available. 211 is a kind of like a directory of social services here in San Diego County that you can look through. We have our local partners like the San Diego Hunger Coalition, and then the 2 food banks in San Diego Food Bank and Feeding San Diego, that also have resources on how you can get help. And then the city of Oceanside also has some COVID-19 specific resources that we highly encourage you all to check out. So again, these links will be available in the chat for you all to access. And with that, we're going to transition into our conversation about food waste. And we like to start off with this picture because we say that this is quite literally America's pie chart when we're talking about food waste. So here in the United States, 40% of our food actually ends up wasted or ends up in the trash. And a way that we kind of explain or make sense of that statistic is, imagine yourself having gone to the grocery store and you bought 5 bags of groceries. You're on your way back to the car, and then you drop 2 of those bags in the parking lot. And instead of picking them up, you leave it there, you walk back to your car. That's essentially what we're doing in our homes today when we're talking about 40% of food being wasted. So what do we mean when we use the term food waste? What are we referring to? A working definition that we like to use is really any food that is grown and produced for the purposes of human consumption or for people to eat, but then for a variety of reasons doesn't end up getting eaten. And we can kind of break out the different types of food waste, which is the 3 pictures that you see here on this slide. So the first type is kind of surplus or excess from grocery stores. So the picture that you see on the far left-hand side of your screen kind of depicts this practice of dumpster diving, which is exactly how it sounds. People who go to the back of a grocery store where they have those large industrial-sized dumpsters, and they jump inside and they find, like you see in the picture, either perfectly good produce, fruits and vegetables, or sometimes they find hundreds of prepackaged items that the grocery store has thrown out. So that's one type of food waste. Another type is overproduction from buffets, from events that have catering, where there's really just a surplus of food being served to a group of people. And then lastly, there's food that goes bad, that has spoiled and can no longer be served or can no longer be eaten. So all of these are different types of food waste, certainly not an exhaustive list, but kind of something to get us started in thinking about the types of food waste. So now we might be wondering, well, where is food waste happening? Where is it coming from? And taking a food systems perspective really shows us that food waste is actually coming from all parts of the food system, starting from food production, manufacturing. But what's really indicative, or what's really kind of eye-opening about this graphic, is that we can see that the greatest generators of food waste are very heavily skewed to the right-hand side. So 70% of all food waste is actually coming from commercial kitchens or from households. And when we're talking about commercial kitchens, we're talking about restaurants, hotels, hospitals, kind of kitchens of that size. And then we can see at 43%, households, or us as individuals, we're kind of taking that #1 spot in terms of the greatest generators of food waste. And I know that that may seem as a kind of a daunting statistic, but one thing that we're really going to be emphasizing throughout this presentation is that this also kind of speaks to the power and the potential positive impact that individual changes or consumer changes can have on the issue of food waste. And the last question here is, well, why does this matter? Why should someone care about the issue of food waste? We can talk about food being wasted as a problem on its own, but we also like to have conversations about how wasting food is also wasting all the resources that went into producing that food. And we can kind of break out primary impacts of food waste, and that's what we've done here on this slide. So first, there are the economic impacts of food waste and really what the financial costs of food waste are, not only on us as consumers, but also on the industry as a whole. And here in the United States, wasted food actually has a total dollar value of $218 billion, which is just an amount that is staggering. All of that is getting wasted alongside the food that ends up in the trash. The next impact is the environmental impact of food waste and the relationship that it has to climate change. When food just sits in landfill and it rots, it produces methane, which is actually a potent greenhouse gas that is more harmful to the environment than carbon dioxide. And if we actually took a kind of a global perspective on this, food waste actually represents 6% of the total US greenhouse gas emissions. So there's really a direct relationship here between wasted food as well as its impact on climate change. And then lastly, there's the social impacts of food waste. And really, what does it mean when we're wasting 40% of our food at the same time that there are members of our community that are going hungry? So when we just talked about Hunger Action Month. So what we're hoping at this point is that the question you're asking yourself is, okay, well, what can I do about this? And the great news is that, it doesn't have to end like this with this moldy orange, but that really there's a lot that we can do as individuals to make an impact on the issue of food waste. And fighting food waste not only is just a way or an opportunity for us to save money, but really is an opportunity to do some environmental and social good at the same time. So the image that you see here on your screen right now is actually a poster that was originally published in 1917 and outlines these 6 strategies for reducing food waste. And we were really inspired by this poster, not only because it was published over 100 years ago and really showing that food waste isn't just something new that we're suddenly talking about, but that people in 1917 cared about this as an issue and were identifying ways to reduce food waste at home. We really use this as inspiration to think about what food waste reduction tips could look like today for our households. And those are the 4 tips that you see here to the right-hand side of the poster. So that's meal planning, smart grocery shopping, proper food storage, and zero waste cooking. And what we're going to be doing for the remainder of this presentation is really doing a deep dive into each of these categories, talking about specific tips. And we'll also be doing kind of a live demonstration for some of these tips to kind of show you what these look like in action, how you can implement some of these tips and strategies in your own homes. So the first strategy that we're going to start with is talking about meal planning. About 1/3 of all household food waste actually comes from preparing too much food and then not really having a plan for how you'll eat it or how you'll use it. So meal planning can be a great way to kind of get started with reducing food waste at home. And the first tip that we have here is actually using your freezer. The freezer can actually be your best friend when we're talking about reducing food waste. It's kind of like this magical pause button that you can put on your food, whether it's fruits and vegetables, or if you're cooking something in bulk and you just have, a large quantity of it that you know you're not going to get through. Putting it in your freezer can actually be a great way of kind of storing it there, making sure it stays fresh. And then when you're planning for your meals, you know that you kind of have something that you can pull from that's easy to use and incorporate into your meals in the future. So if you're not already using your freezer, that is a great way to kind of get started with reducing food waste. The second strategy here is really making your meal plans with specific recipes in mind. So really kind of taking an inventory of what you have in your freezer, in your refrigerator, and then also in your pantry, and really identifying recipes that are going to use up those ingredients. And for a lot of us, that's not something that's intuitive, or it's a little bit hard to get started with doing that. So there are some online resources that can really help with finding recipes. And so we'll send a couple through the chat right now, but one is actually called Supercook. It's this really cool kind of search engine where you can enter the ingredients that you have, and it spits out recipes that use those ingredients. So if you have some things that you're not really sure how to put together, that can be a fun way of discovering new recipes. And then SaveTheFood.com also has this really cool kind of list or database of some zero waste recipes that you can try incorporating into your meal planning. The third tip here is creating an eat me first section of your fridge. So that's kind of the picture you see in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. It can be a box like you see in the picture, or just a section of your shelf, but really it's the idea of having a designated area in your refrigerator where you're putting the items that need to be used first. I'm sure it's all happened to us before, where maybe you're looking for your mustard or something in your fridge, and you're digging around, and all of a sudden you find a pack of strawberries or something in the back of your fridge that just got forgotten and has now gone bad and can't be used. Having kind of this designated section where you're organizing your fridge and pulling to the front the items that either have a short shelf life or have just been in your fridge for a while can really help make sure that they're not getting lost there in the back of your fridge. And then when you're doing that inventory of your ingredients and making, your meal plan with specific recipes, to really pull from those ingredients first. So that's a great way of both organizing your fridge and preventing food from going bad. So if that's something you're interested in implementing in your own kitchen, we're going to send over in the chat a printable Eat Me First sign. So this is something, again, you can either create the box or just designate an area in your fridge that's the Eat Me First section. And then the last tip here is to plan and eat the leftovers night. Especially if you're new to meal planning, it can seem really daunting or feel overwhelming to suddenly have to plan for so many meals, so far in advance. So if you, pick one weekday or one day of the week, and you kind of mark that day as an eat the leftovers day, it can make the meal planning process a little bit easier because you know what you're going to be pulling. And then it also makes sure that any leftovers you have in your fridge and your freezer get eaten up. We'll talk about leftovers in a lot more detail when we get to the zero waste cooking tips, but really introducing it here as part of meal planning can be a great strategy as well. All right, the next category is really looking at smart grocery shopping tips. So what are the things that we can do while we're out grocery shopping that can actually help us reduce our food waste before we even, get home or get to our kitchens? And the first tip, which may seem really simple or almost like common sense, is creating a grocery shopping list. So whether that's something that you are, doing on pen and paper, or if you have a cool app that you're using, a lot of grocery stores actually have their own apps that you can create grocery lists within. But just having some documented list where you're writing out the ingredients that you're going to be buying from the grocery store helps keep you on track when you get there and really prevents kind of overbuying or buying anything that you really don't need or weren't intending to buy when you got to the grocery store. And kind of a next level up or a step up from making a grocery list is making sure that you're shopping with specific recipes in mind. So this really goes back to the same idea with meal planning, where it really helps to have a plan for how you'll be using your ingredients, rather than just buying a lot of things from the grocery store. You go home, put them away in your fridge or your pantry, and then they just get forgotten. There's not really a plan for how you'll be using them. So having a grocery shopping list with those recipes in mind is also a great way of making sure that your ingredients and your food gets used. The next tip is kind of a fun one, which is making sure that you eat something before going grocery shopping. I don't know about all of you, but I know for myself, if I go to the grocery store when I feel hungry, everything looks delicious. And so I end up with things in my cart that I probably was not intending to buy when I first got there. So eating a snack just before going grocery shopping can be a great way to just kind of prevent those impulse purchases. And there was actually a study that found that people who go shopping on an empty stomach end up spending 64% more than non-hungry shoppers. So picking that snack up can be a great tip. The next strategy is one that's really important, and that's understanding date labels on food. There's a lot of confusion around this, and what a lot of people don't realize is that date labels are actually not federally regulated. They are dates that are created by food manufacturers, and they really indicate food quality more than food safety. And because there's kind of such a variety of different wordings and ways in which date labels are printed on products, so best by, use by, better if used by, all of that really just adds to the confusion as to what all of that means. The only food that is regulated for food safety is baby food. So what we like to say is, if you're not eating baby food, use your judgment and your best senses to determine if food has gone bad, rather than just relying on the date that's printed on the can or on the box. And we've actually developed a great resource for helping you all kind of navigate what different date labels mean and how you can use your senses to determine if something has gone bad. So we'll send that over in the chat, and we actually have this document available in both English and Spanish. So that's going to be sent over for you all to have on hand. And then the last tip here is supporting imperfection. So in the world of food waste, we like to talk about something called imperfect produce. So you can kind of see in the picture here on the slide, these are fruits and vegetables that just look a little bit different. So the mushroom that kind of has another mushroom attached to it, the carrot with the extra leg. These are fruits and vegetables that, essentially are deemed too ugly to be put on a grocery store shelf. Nothing wrong with them in terms of their nutritional value or their quality or their safety, but a lot of times they get overlooked or disregarded just by, because of the way that they look. So really, changing our mindset about what we expect food to look like and how we see food when we see it in a grocery store, and not thinking that this is trash, but this is still actually, nutritious, valuable food. Can be a great way of preventing food waste while we're grocery shopping. So we're going to go ahead and launch into our first live demonstration for some of these tips. So hopefully what you're seeing now is myself, my kitchen in the background, and then next to me I have this box. And we're going to be kind of referencing this box throughout all of the live demonstrations through the rest of the presentation. And what I want to ask all of you to do is really think about this box in terms of what it means to you. If you are a regular grocery shopper, you can think of this box as, I'm going through my bag of groceries that I just, brought home. If you are getting your groceries delivered through a service, or maybe you're subscribed to a community supported agriculture program, you can think of this box as something you got delivered. Maybe you're someone who's utilizing some of those community food distributions that we talked about earlier, where they are distributing food in a box like this. Whatever it might mean to you, just kind of keep that in mind. And what we're going to be doing is pulling some different items from here and talking about how we can apply the tips that we're presenting. So we're going to continue kind of our conversation around this idea of imperfect produce. And what I'm going to start off with here is this potato. And I know the sun is kind of bright here, but what you can kind of hopefully see is that this potato has kind of like an interesting fissure here, almost like a small dent. It's not perfectly smooth, like maybe what you're used to seeing potatoes look like, but there's nothing wrong with this potato. You know, might just have to be more careful when you're peeling it, but this is still perfectly fine to cook with and to eat. And the same thing is kind of with this lemon. You know, sometimes we're used to lemons being really round and not having these kind of tall ends, but this lemon is perfectly fine to eat on the inside. If you see a lemon that looks like this, don't ignore it, don't throw it in the trash. It's still perfectly fine to use. And then lastly, I have kind of this tomato. And right when I pick it up, I can tell that it feels pretty soft, you know, and we're typically used to, you know, tomatoes feeling pretty firm. But don't throw this away. It's not spoiled, it's not bad. A lot of times, actually, soft tomatoes are the best ones to use if you're making a salsa or if you want to make a pasta sauce. So don't give up on something like this. This is still a perfectly good ingredient that you can use. And then going back to thinking about, you know, this idea of date labels. You know, let's say in your box you have this can of soup. Probably the first thing you're going to do with canned food is I'm going to flip it over and check the date that's on the bottom. And this one here says March 4th of 2020. My first thought might be, oh my goodness, this is like a can that is 6 months old. I can't eat it. I'm going to throw it away. But again, before you do that, we want you to, you know, look at that handout, see what this date label really means, and use your senses. So I would open this can up and I would look inside. Do I see any mold? Are there any kind of weird discolorations on this soup? I'm gonna smell it. Does it smell off, you know, or does it smell like regular soup? If all of those things check out, this is probably going to be something perfectly fine for me to use and to eat. So don't rely on just a date label to you know, think that something has gone bad, but really do kind of an investigation. All right, so we're going to go ahead and go back to our slides. So the next category of tips that we have here are proper food storage tips. And really one of the best ways to actually prevent food waste is to store your food correctly, especially with COVID-19 right now, whether you are getting your food from a grocery store or you're picking it up from a distribution. We're probably all trying to limit, you know, how often we're going outside or our contact with people. So storing our food correctly can help it stay fresh for longer. As well as, you know, making sure that it's not going bad before we've actually gotten the full use out of it. And what's really interesting with proper food storage is, you know, a lot of times the ways that we receive food, whether it's in a box or the way that we pick it up from a grocery store, is not actually the best way to be storing that food. And so what we're going to be doing in this demonstration is pulling out some kind of really common groceries or items that we may pick up from the grocery store or receive in a box, and talk about what the best way to store them will be. And the two handouts that you see here on the slide are also handouts that we've developed, and a lot of the food that we'll be showing actually is listed here. So we'll send the links for both of these in the chat box right now, and you can kind of pull them up and follow along, or just kind of bookmark them and save them so that you can reference it whenever you want to know how to properly store a specific food item. So let's go ahead and switch back to the video here. So the first thing I'm going to start with that I have in my box is this carton of milk. A lot of times people store their milk in the door of their refrigerator. And, you know, sometimes people do that because, you know, it fits really nicely in the door, or they use milk a lot, so it's easy to kind of just pull it from the door. But what people don't realize is that the door of your fridge is actually the warmest part. And so if you put milk there, it can tend to spoil pretty quickly. That's why, if you know, you may have noticed that you just bought milk or you just received some milk and it's only been a few days and all of a sudden it smells off, or it's not good to use anymore. So you want to make sure that you're storing your milk in the main compartment of your refrigerator and not leaving it in the door. Milk also actually freezes pretty well. So if you have a lot of extra milk, or it's kind of getting close to going bad and you don't have a plan to use it, putting it in an airtight container and then leaving just a little bit of space, so not filling up that container all the way, because milk can expand in the freezer, can be a great way to kind of keep your milk staying fresh. The next thing we have here in this box is sliced bread or toast. You can actually store your sliced bread in its original container at room temperature on the counter. But you want to make sure that what you do is after you open it is that you always kind of tightly seal it afterwards. So you can see with this bag, I've already opened it. And every time I pull out some bread, I just want to make sure that I'm twisting the plastic so that no air is getting inside. If you leave it open and you let air get inside, that's how it gets stale or goes hard really quickly. So whether you have a clip or a rubber band or just twisting it closed, that's going to be the best way to store your bread if you're keeping it out on the counter. But again, if you have extra bread, let's say you got a couple extra packages of these in your box, you can absolutely store these in the freezer as well. Again, just making sure it's in an airtight container. The next thing I'm pulling out here are some eggs. Eggs are similar to milk, where you want to make sure that you're storing them in the main compartment of your fridge, so not leaving them in the door. And eggs can actually stay fresh, 3 to 5 weeks actually after the date that's printed on the carton. But if you're ever in a situation where you're not sure if your eggs are still good to use, or if they're still safe to eat, there's actually a cool trick that you can do to determine if your eggs are still good. So what you want to do is just get like a glass of water and take one of your eggs and just put it in that water. And essentially what you're looking for is whether your egg floats or if it sinks. So if it sinks to the bottom, the way that my egg just did, it means it's perfectly fine. You can safely eat this egg. But if the egg floats to the top of your water, then it's no longer good to eat. So make sure that your egg is sinking to the bottom and not floating at the top. All right. And then also in my box, I have some canned foods. So I have some canned vegetables with this corn, and then I also have these, let's turn the label, I have these cans of tuna. So with canned food, you want to make sure that you're storing these in a cool, dry place. So if I were to put them in my own kitchen, I would put them right up here in this cupboard. If you ever open a can, so let's say I open this can of tuna, but I'm not really going to use everything that's inside, I can restore it. So putting it in another airtight container and then storing it in the freezer will help actually keep it good for another 3 to 6 months. And one thing that is important with kind of canned food is you always want to examine the can itself. Make sure that it's not leaking, there's no rust on it, there's no major bumps or dents in the can. If there is any of those things, it's a sign that the product inside might not be good to eat. So always inspect your cans kind of before you open them up to make sure that they're still good. Next, I have some cilantro. So if you get it from a grocery store, or even in a box, a lot of times, you'll get it in this single-use plastic bag. But you don't want to leave it in that bag and just kind of put it in your drawer. That's going to make it get really sad and soggy. So what you want to do is actually take it out, and then you can use a jar or just another cup of water. Put a little bit of water at the bottom of that jar or that cup, and then you're just going to stick your cilantro in it exactly the same way that you would put flowers in a vase. And if you put this on the top shelf of your fridge, this is actually going to help your cilantro stay fresh for much longer than if you just left it in that plastic bag. And you can do this for other kind of leafy herbs as well. And then lastly, for our conversation about food storage, out of my box, I'm pulling out here this pack of tortillas and then this pack of shredded cheese. So, both of these actually store really well in the freezer. So let's say you get kind of a bulk pack of the tortillas, or you have a lot of extra kind of cheese. Putting them in the freezer is a great way of keeping them fresh, and then you can pull it out whenever you need it. So freezer is a great place to put those cheese. All right. So that's kind of our food storage tips. So let's go ahead and go back here. To our slides. All right. So we've talked about, how to plan for our meals, how to shop for our ingredients, how to store that food once we get home. But now we want to kind of bring it all full circle. How can I cook in a way that's also really zero waste oriented? So we're going to go through some of these zero waste cooking strategies. And the first is what's called swapping this for that, or really what we're referring to as ingredient substitutions. So I'll tell kind of a personal story about this. The other day, I really wanted to make some pancakes for breakfast. And the recipe that I was following called for some milk that I didn't have at the time because we had just finished it. But I did have some half and half cream on hand, and I actually referenced this ingredient substitution list that told me if I add a little bit of water to half and half cream, it becomes a great substitute for milk in recipes. So that's what I did, and I ended up with really amazing pancakes. And then I also was able to use up this ingredient, this half and half cream that I might have ended up actually being wasted because I really didn't have a plan for using it otherwise. So a lot of times you actually might find that you have a lot of ingredients or items in your fridge or in your pantry that can be, perfect substitutions for something in a recipe, and it allows you to kind of use them up so that they don't get wasted. So if you're interested in kind of exploring more interesting ingredient substitutions, we have some links for some online lists of common ingredients and how they can be substituted that we'll send through the chat right now. And what you can do is next time that you're cooking or you find that you're short a certain ingredient, check out that list and see if you can actually repurpose something in your kitchen to make it work for your recipe. The next tip for cooking is to repurpose leftovers. So, a lot of times leftovers are not the most exciting things to eat. People think that they're lame or, no one really wants to eat the leftovers. But if we just kind of apply a little bit of creativity in the kitchen, we can really kind of transform our leftovers into a completely new and creative dish. So the picture you actually see in the top right-hand side of your screen is a fried rice that's been made out of some leftover brown rice and actually the stalks of broccoli. So a lot of times people only, go for the dark florets at the top, but the stalks are also perfectly nutritious and really yummy to use in meals. So that's a great way of kind of elevating some leftovers into something that's a bit more exciting. If you have, for example, some vegetables and some eggs in your fridge, you can whip those together into a frittata. So there's a lot of recipes that can really kind of boost up or, again, elevate leftovers to make them a little bit more exciting to eat and prevent them from just ending up in the trash because no one wanted to eat them. The next tip here is reviving limpy produce. So let's say that you had some lettuce or some celery that you pulled out because you wanted to put them in a salad, and you just pull them out and they're so wilted. They're not crisp at all. They're well past the prime from when you first bought them. Don't give up on them. There's actually a way that you can kind of bring them back to life, and that's by putting them in an ice water bath. So if you get a bowl and fill it with water and some ice and put your lettuce or whatever wilted produce you have and just leave it in that ice water for a little bit, what you'll find is that it'll actually crisp right back up. It's pretty amazing. So that's a great way to kind of, save your food that way. And then the last tip we have here is saving your peels and your scraps. A lot of the food waste that comes out of cooking really is, scrap waste. If you're cutting vegetables, cutting an onion, peeling a carrot, the items that we typically don't think of as being edible, right? Like I can't eat an onion skin, so I'll just throw it away. A lot of times you can actually use those and keep those vegetable peels and scraps on hand and make your own vegetable stock or vegetable broth out of them. So the picture you see in the bottom right-hand corner is actually a picture of what that looks like. And in the chat, we'll send over kind of this cool recipe card for how you can make your own veggie stock. And what I'll actually do here for our last live demonstration is kind of show you how I do this in my own kitchen. So, bag. So what I do is I keep this kind of huge gallon-sized Ziploc bag on hand in my kitchen. So whenever I'm cooking, chopping vegetables, I'll pull this Ziploc bag out, and then anything that I have that's a scrap that's left over, I'll put it into the Ziploc bag. And then what I do is I put it in my freezer. there's kind of two benefits to doing this. The first is that if you're accumulating scraps over time, you don't want them to go bad before you have a chance to kind of make that stock. So putting it in the freezer is a great way of keeping it fresh. And then the second reason is, you know, if you keep these onion peels or scraps over time, they're going to start to smell. So if you don't want smelly food scrap bags on your counter, putting them in the freezer is actually a great way of kind of keeping the odors at bay. So I'm going to bring it closer so you can kind of see what I have in here. So you can see that I've added kind of a lot of onion roots and onion skins. I have some ends of celery here. I have some garlic skins. Last week I was using up some parsley and was only using the leaves, so I ended up adding the stems of the parsley into this bag. I have some carrot skins, some mushrooms. All of these are kind of great items to use for a veggie stock. There are some other, you know, vegetable scraps that we wouldn't necessarily recommend, like potato peels, zucchini, beets, since those kind of tend to make a broth more cloudy or more bitter. So if that's not something you're going for, kind of sticking with onions, celery, carrots, any kind of herb stems, mushrooms, that can be a great starting point for kind of your veggie stock. So I'm gonna keep working on this bag until I fill it up and then make my own stock. And then the last thing I have here in my box is this kind of bunch of carrots. So, you know, just imagine yourself receiving carrots that look like this. You might be a little bit shocked at first because we're used to our carrots being trimmed down and peeled and don't really have the tops attached to them. But you know, don't get scared and don't throw the tops away. You can actually cook with them. So in the slide previously, there was actually a picture of a pesto that was made out of the tops of carrots. So save your greens to maybe turn them into a cool and new pesto, or the greens of carrots actually have a lot of flavor as well. So you can put these into your bag of veggie scraps to turn them into a broth as well. So don't get intimidated if you see, you know, your carrots or any other food coming out like this. And we really want to encourage you all to consider, you know, cooking with your entire ingredient. So we're gonna go back to our presentation here. And that's actually the last of our live demonstrations and actually kind of the end of our presentation here. And, you know, what I'm really hoping is that some of these tips and tricks stood out to all of you and you feel inspired to make some changes, whether it's to your meal planning habits, your grocery shopping, the way you're storing your food, or even the way that you're cooking. Really small changes that we all take in our individual habits can have a huge impact on the issue of food waste. So I really want to thank you all for joining us for the presentation today. And we would love to stay connected with you all, you know, following the presentation. So on the slide right now, there's information about the website and social media for both the San Diego Food System Alliance, as well as Green Oceanside and the city of Oceanside. So we would, again, love to stay connected with you. And what we want to do now is actually use the rest of the time that we have for any questions and answers. So I know that if there's any questions that came through the Q&A, we can get to those, or if you have any questions that you have now, please feel free to send those in.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Gertrude. I'm going to help moderate some of the questions. So I do actually see that one of the attendees has raised their hand in the attendee panel. So I'm going to see Pat Frazier, if I can allow you to talk so that you can ask your question. I will go ahead and try that out right now. All right, so you should be able to talk now if you take yourself off mute.
My question is, I run into trouble a lot with spinach, and I saw how you put the parsley in the water. However, the spinach that I use doesn't come in bunches like that. So how can I preserve the spinach?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know my family used to always buy kind of the bulk bag of spinach, and so there's just so much of it that we can't go through it. What we actually used to do is open up that bag, and we would actually store half of that bag in the freezer Frozen spinach is a
okay.
great way of keeping it, fresh. So putting some in the freezer and then just pulling it out when you're ready to cook with it, it actually thaws out pretty quickly. And then we kind of use the fresh amount that we've left in salads and things that we're cooking with immediately. And then that way we're not kind of left with the bottom of the bag that's soggy and hasn't been used. So
Right.
putting any excess spinach in the freezer is a great way of storing it and keeping it fresh.
Okay, and it still comes up fresh. It doesn't come out soggy when you thaw it out.
I think if you don't pack it in too tightly, it shouldn't get too soggy, and it's especially good for cooking. So I would recommend the spinach that you're freezing, would be best used in recipes where you're cooking down that spinach, and you wouldn't be able to notice any difference in that texture.
Okay. Okay.
I'd
Thank
also
you.
like to recommend the way you store it, even in the freezer. So, consider using a silicone bag or some sort of reusable bag. I really
What
like.
kind of bag did you say? Silicone?
So a silicone bag. So a lot of times people will use a Ziploc baggie, something that's kind of single use and disposable. And a lot of times that actually can get moisture in it. So I'd also encourage you to look at using, a reusable container or Tupperware or even a silicone bag. There's new bags called stasher bags. And they are a little pricey on the front end, but as compared to buying single use Ziploc baggies over and over again, they're affordable and they really store the food well and kind of mitigate that moisture coming in.
Okay. Thank
The
you.
other thing is, does spinach kind of work? I mean, I always end up with a lot of kale and sometimes more than I like to eat. And so sometimes I'll roast, kale, and that will kind of give me something crunchy to eat and make it tasty. Does that also work with spinach? Roasting?
I personally have never tried it with spinach,
I
but
don't
I did actually have one more storage tip that I recently started doing with my spinach and other lettuces that's really made a big difference. A lot of the times I buy spinach and it comes in that kind of plastic box, and what I do, or a plastic bag, and I will actually put paper towels or like little reusable kind of cloth napkins inside the box or that bag, and that helps kind of absorb some of the moisture, and it actually has made a really big difference in helping it stay fresh for longer so that you don't get those weird slimy bits and pieces.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Very good tip.
Thank you. Thanks, Pat. All right. I see that someone else has raised their hand to talk. So Jessica Del Toro, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can ask your question.
Hello, my question is, do you recommend using plastic or glass containers to store foods? Is one better than the other?
Sure. So Colleen and Annika, feel free to jump in kind of from the environmental perspective with Green Oceanside. I personally try to store my food in glass also because it makes it easy for me to kind of heat it up in the microwave. I prefer to kind of avoid plastic products and heating those up. In terms of kind of from the food storage perspective, I don't believe it would make a big difference as long as both, the plastic versus glass options have a airtight seal, so a good lid that fits on there. But Colleen or Annika, if you guys want to jump in kind of with your thoughts from the environmental lens as well, go ahead.
Well, even from a storage perspective, I don't think there's too much difference, but the one thing to watch out for is if you are using glass in the freezer, make sure it's a freezer safe glass container. And the great thing about, the movement towards glass versus just plastic is there's a lot of great product out there that's become a lot more affordable. So I think that's important to also acknowledge. From an environmental perspective, using a reusable glass container, environmentally, makes more sense, mitigating the amount of plastics in our environment. But at the end of the day, the fact that you're using a reusable container, versus other more single-use disposable options is a fantastic way to, strive for zero waste. It's all about baby steps, and it's not about perfection.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. We also have had a couple of questions come in through the Q&A chat box. So what I wanted to do is read this out loud, and I'll pose the question to Sarah, and Colleen can jump in as well if she'd like. So the question is, how can I create tasty meals for my family if I have a food box from a pantry? There's always a different variety of items, and I never know what to make. So Sarah, did you have any advice for this question?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know right now, kind of especially with COVID and we're all at home, where our cooking burden is a little bit higher, we're preparing meals at home. So I think that's a great question for the entire group, whether you're getting a box from the food pantry or you're just kind of trying to make sense of the groceries that you have. When we kind of were talking about meal planning and building your meal plans around specific recipes, that resource that I mentioned called Supercook is a great way to get started if you're not really sure how to put ingredients together. So if you have a couple staples, you can put it in there and then really kind of sift through the recipes that come up and see which ones are doable for your family and which ones that they would really like. So I would say that's a great starting point if you want to get kind of recipe ideas for how to cook with some of those ingredients. But I think also just, thinking about, what are some staple items that your family enjoys making, and can you use the ingredients in your box to make them? So to the idea of ingredient substitutions. So, maybe they really like pizza, but there isn't flour in the food box that day, but they gave you a whole head of cauliflower. You can actually use that cauliflower to make a crust for the pizza, and it ends up being kind of a really cool alternative. So I would say kind of both of those might be helpful ways to get started with thinking about the foods that they do like and that are tasty, and seeing whether the ingredients you have can be transformed to kind of make those recipes. And I'll let Colleen also add to that if there's any additional suggestions.
I just want to say thank you for the question. There's a lot of great resources out there that Sarah had mentioned, but I think that question needs to continue, and if you are getting a food box, whoever is providing that food box to you, whether it's a vendor that, is a for-profit company, they should encourage them to provide you ideas, to do things with their products. So if it's from a food pantry, I know a lot of feeding agencies are really trying to, provide content within the food box, not only about resources to help families, but also about how to utilize the materials in the food box. But I would definitely encourage, if you're getting food box, whether from a vendor or from a food pantry, ask that very question. And that's really good feedback for those entities to come up with creative solutions. Because I know that is a big initiative. From the Green Oceanside Zero Waste perspective, this is just the beginning of our food recovery programming, and we're looking to improve upon it. So I know our future, we're really looking to work with local food pantries, local food box vendors to ensure that they're providing information and make it simple for families to utilize the food in the box itself. I know I've had my own challenges with food boxes. I've definitely used the internet quite a bit and various apps. So, luckily we're in a world of tons of information and a lot of help. So please reach out.
Awesome. Thank you, Colleen. And we did have someone also add in the Q&A function that indeed many pantries try to give out recipe cards with their food boxes. So that's a great resource if your local food pantry does that. Another question that's come in through the Q&A is from Valerie. She is asking, do you have any tips for learning how to buy only the amount of food you need? I notice that I always end up buying too much, even when I do meal plan. So Sarah, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure, that's a great question. And I think kind of, especially when we think about, smart grocery shopping tips, even the way that our food is packaged, there's a big trend towards this kind of bulk packaging or wholesale retailers where, they're incentivizing you to kind of buy in these large quantities. But if we don't have plans to be able to use it all, it kind of puts this burden on us of what do we do with that ingredient. If we want to kind of, one recommendation I have is kind of starting with right sizing your portions when you're looking at recipes. There's some great online resources around kind of portion size guides to help kind of identify, how many people am I cooking for, what specific food type am I cooking, whether it's pasta or rice or vegetables or meat, and can help you kind of identify what the right portion is for that meal. And then you can kind of translate that to your grocery list. So how much of this rice do I need to buy, or how much of this vegetable do I need to purchase? If it ends up being economical for you to buy in bulk, or to buy things in larger quantities, that's where the food storage tips I think are going to really come in handy, where maybe that you can't use up all of that rice at once, and you don't want it to go bad or anything else. Properly storing it can make sure that you can still access it to be able to use it for future meals. So I would start with really identifying portions for the meals and building your recipes and your grocery shopping from that.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. And we have one quick last question in the last minute, which is a question about blanching. So the question was, when do you blanch food before freezing? And for those of you unfamiliar with the process of blanching, it's essentially boiling water and steaming or quickly submerging vegetables in there so that it gets kind of a quick cook on them and they can maintain their integrity when you do freeze them. So the question about when to blanch food before freezing would be, the answer would be kind of, right before you put it in the freezer, get it blanched, let it cool off so it's not boiling hot when you put it in there, put it into an airtight container or bag, and then go ahead and freeze it. And there are specific vegetables that they recommend that you blanch just to kind of keep the integrity. So specifically like broccoli or cauliflower, those kind of things, string beans, asparagus, and okra, those are the main ones that they recommend you do that blanching process for. And I know we're at the hour, but I believe there was an announcement that the city of Oceanside wanted to make. So I'll just go ahead and let them tell you about some exciting new workshops that they have coming up and events before we officially close out.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you, Gircha, and thank you, Sarah. Fantastic work. We're really excited to partner with the San Diego Food System Alliance. They're working closely not only with our community at large, but working closely with our businesses to ensure that, we're mitigating food waste, preventing food waste, and also recovering food for people and getting that to our food insecure communities. So fantastic work. We have a couple workshops coming up next week, actually. Annika or Gircha will share within the chat the links to register. But next Monday and Tuesday, we have a series of zero waste planning workshops. The city is updating its current zero waste plan to go to City Council for adoption in December. And as part of that plan, we're identifying strategies in which to, improve sustainability and community health and vibrancy in Oceanside. And we really want your input. We really want your feedback. We want to know what's important to you, what would be beneficial to you, from anywhere in regards to resources, education, services, for food recovery or food waste prevention, reuse, repair, as well as recycling and composting. So on Monday, we're having a business-focused workshop. Anyone is welcome to attend. And that's really going to be focused on, how businesses can be a part of the solution and also how the city can support businesses within their economic recovery stages. And then on Tuesday, we're going to be having a more public community-focused workshop, really kind of understanding how to support our residential communities and our multifamily communities, and also how to support our partner organizations across the city. So that plan is a plan for the community of the people, and I really encourage you to attend. So hopefully I will see you there. And please give us feedback. Let us know how we can provide this information in the best way possible, and tell your friends and family. It will be available and recorded. And I look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Colleen. And thank you to everyone who attended today. We'll be following up with the resources that we put through the chat box, and we'll also send out a link to the webinar recording. So once again, thank you so much, and we hope you have a great evening. There's going to be a survey that launches after we close out the webinar, and please do give us some feedback via that survey. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.